Hey guys, tonight we begin not with ancient Rome or a Shakespearean stage, but with something far more dangerous and glittering. The Las Vegas underworld of 1989. Because believe it or not, navigating loyalty in a world of neon lights, casino empires, and loaded handshakes was somehow even more deadly than the original assassination on the Senate floor. From boardroom conspiracies to desert vengeance, this tale of ambition and betrayal trades togas for tailored suits and the Ides of March for a blood-soaked night in the Nevada desert. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together, where power, loyalty, and ambition collide under the bright lights of Sin City. The neon lights of the Las Vegas Strip burned like a river of fire against the desert night, and nowhere did they burn brighter than at the newly opened Caesar's Triumph, the crown jewel in Julius Caesar's ever-expanding empire. It was February 1989, and the streets outside the casino pulsed with celebration. Limousines crawled bumper to bumper down the boulevard, their occupants eager to witness what everyone was calling the event of the decade, the grand opening that would cement Julius Caesar's position as the undisputed king of the American gambling industry. Inside those limousines and spilling out onto the sidewalks were the high rollers, the showgirls, the desperate gamblers, and the merely curious. They wore sequined dresses and sharp suits, their hair teased high and held in place with enough aqua net to survive a hurricane. They smoked cigarettes and drank champagne, their laughter echoing off the concrete and glass towers that had transformed this desert outpost into a glittering monument to excess and ambition. But not everyone was celebrating. On a corner 2 blocks from the main entrance, 2 men stood in the shadows cast by the competing neon signs. Flavius wore a worn leather jacket over his casino security uniform, his face lined with the kind of weariness that came from seeing too much for too long. Beside him, Marullus chain-smoked Marlboro Reds, his eyes scanning the crowd with barely concealed contempt. "Look at them," Marullus muttered, crushing his cigarette under his heel and immediately lighting another, throwing their money at his feet like he's some kind of god. Don't they understand what he really is? Don't they see what's happening here? Flavius shifted uncomfortably, his hand instinctively moving to check that his wallet was still in his pocket, an old habit from his days working the floor. They see what they want to see. Free drinks, pretty lights, the chance to hit it big. That's all most people need. That's all they've ever needed. That's not all I'm talking about, and you know it?" Marullus shot back, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. 6 months ago, Julius Caesar controlled 3 casinos in Vegas and 2 in Atlantic City. Now he's got his fingers in every major operation from here to the East Coast. He's got politicians in his pocket, judges on his payroll, and the families back in New York either working for him or running scared. Nobody moves in this business without his say-so anymore. That's not success, Flavius. That's a takeover. The crowd surged past them, a group of young women in tight miniskirts and off-the-shoulder tops, their perfume mixing with cigarette smoke and desert heat. They were laughing, clutching promotional chips they'd been handed by smiling attendants at the door, already drunk on the promise of what the night might bring. Behind them came middle-aged men in polo shirts and gold chains, their wives hanging on their arms, everyone moving toward the entrance like moths drawn to a flame that would surely consume them. Flavius watched them go, his expression troubled. "Keep your voice down. You want to end up in the desert with a bullet in your head? You know what happens to people who talk about Julius Caesar the wrong way. You remember what happened to Cardone last year? They found his Cadillac out past Henderson with him still in the driver's seat, 3 bullets in the back of his skull. His only crime was saying Caesar was getting too big for his own good." "That's exactly my point," Marullus insisted, but there was fear creeping into his anger now, a tremor in his hand as he took another drag. "We're all supposed to just smile and nod while he builds his empire? We're supposed to pretend this is normal? That this is how things should be? There used to be rules, Flavius. There used to be structure. The families kept each other in check. Now there's just Julius Caesar, and everyone else is either working for him or dead." The 2 men fell silent as a black stretch limousine pulled up to the curb, its chrome gleaming under the streetlights. The door opened and out stepped Marcus Antonius Mark Antony, to those who knew him well enough to use the nickname, though few were foolish enough to presume such familiarity. He was Julius Caesar's right hand, his enforcer, his most trusted lieutenant. Antony wore a white suit that probably cost more than most people made in a year, his dark hair slicked back, a thick gold chain visible at his open collar. He moved with the casual confidence of a man who knew he was untouchable, flanked by 2 bodyguards whose bulky frames suggested the shoulder holsters hidden beneath their jackets. Well, Anthony called out, his voice carrying over the noise of the crowd, despite its casual tone. "If it isn't Flavius and Marullus, shouldn't you boys be working? I'm pretty sure security doesn't get the night off just because we're celebrating." The bodyguards moved, with him as he approached, their presence making the threat implicit. Flavius straightened, trying to maintain some dignity, while Marullus ground out his cigarette with more force than necessary. "We're on break," Flavius said evenly. "Just getting some air before our shift starts." Anthony's smile never wavered, but his eyes cold and calculating behind the charm told a different story. "Getting air? Right. Not out here talking about things that don't concern you? Not filling the air with opinions that nobody asked for?" He pulled a gold cigarette case from his jacket, extracted a cigarette with manicured fingers, and lit it with a matching gold lighter. "Because I'd hate to think that on the biggest night of Mr. Caesar's career, some of his own people were out here spreading doubt. Killing the vibe, you know what I mean?" "We weren't," Marullus started, but Anthony cut him off with a raised hand. "Save it. I don't need to hear your excuses or your complaints. You think Julius Caesar got where he is by listening to every nobody with a grudge? The man is a visionary. While you 2 are out here whining about the old days, he's building something that'll last forever. He's brought order to chaos. He's made this city what it was always meant to be his." Anthony took a long drag, exhaling smoke that drifted up into the neon-washed night. "You want to be part of that. You show some respect. You want to stand in the way? Well, the desert's a big place, and it keeps secrets real well." Before either man could respond, a commotion erupted near the casino entrance. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, and through that gap came Julius Caesar himself, surrounded by his inner circle. Even from a distance, his presence was magnetic, undeniable. He wore a black suit cut to perfection, a crimson silk shirt open at the collar, diamond rings catching the light with every gesture. His hair was dark and swept back, touched with just enough gray at the temples to suggest wisdom rather than age. He moved through the crowd like a senator through ancient Rome, one hand raised in acknowledgement of the cheers, the other resting on the shoulder of whoever was lucky enough to walk beside him. The crowd erupted. People pressed forward, reaching out to touch him, to shake his hand, to simply be near him. Flashbulbs popped from cameras held by tourists and local press alike. A banner stretched across the casino's entrance read, "Triumph Grand Opening," in letters 10 feet high, and beneath it, in smaller but still prominent text, "Caesar Enterprises, the future of gaming." "There he is," Anthony said, his voice carrying a reverence that bordered on worship. "That's what power looks like, boys. That's what you're witnessing. History being made right in front of your eyes." He flicked his cigarette away and started walking toward the entrance. "You two better get inside and do your jobs. And remember, Mr. Caesar rewards loyalty and doesn't forget disloyalty. Choose wisely which side you want to be on." As Anthony disappeared into the crowd, Flavius and Marulus stood frozen, watching the spectacle unfold. Julius Caesar had reached the main entrance now, and someone it looked like Casca, one of his senior associates, was handing him a pair of golden scissors to cut the ceremonial ribbon. The crowd pressed closer, chanting his name. "Caesar, Caesar, Caesar." "This is madness," Marulus whispered. "They're treating him like he's royalty, like he's some kind of king." "Maybe that's exactly what he wants to be," Flavius replied quietly. "And maybe nobody's going to stop him." Inside the casino, the main floor was a cathedral of capitalism and excess. Slot machines lined the walls in endless rows, their digital displays flashing primary colors, red, blue, yellow, green, while their mechanical innards rang and chimed with every pull of the lever. Cocktail waitresses in glittering showgirl costumes that left little to the imagination wove through the maze of bodies, balancing trays of free drinks above their heads with practiced ease. At the card tables, dealers in crisp white shirts and bow ties shuffled and dealt with mechanical precision, while players hunched over their chips, their faces tight with concentration or loose with alcohol and hope. The carpet was thick and patterned with gold Roman coins and laurel wreaths, the ceiling painted to resemble the Sistine Chapel, but with Julius Caesar's face replacing Adam in the center panel, a touch of ego that some found amusing and others found disturbing. Crystal chandeliers the size of compact cars hung overhead, and on every wall, video screens played promotional footage of Caesar's other properties. His handshake with the governor, his appearance on Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, his donations to local charities. Julius Caesar made his entrance through the main floor like a conquering general returning from war. The crowd parted before him, and he stopped every few feet to shake hands, to accept congratulations, to pose for photographs with high rollers and local celebrities. His entourage followed in his wake lawyers, accountants, muscle, and those whose job titles were deliberately vague. They all wore the uniform of success: designer suits, Italian leather shoes, Rolex watches that caught the light with every movement. But not everyone in that inner circle wore their loyalty comfortably. Near the back, speaking in low tones to one another, were two men whose body language suggested a conversation of weight and consequence. Cassius was tall and lean, his face angular and sharp, his eyes constantly moving as if searching for threats or opportunities. In his world, they were often the same thing. He wore a gray suit with a thin black tie, and his fingers drummed constantly against his thigh, a nervous energy that never quite found release. Beside him stood Marcus Brutus, and the contrast between them was striking. Brutus carried himself with a dignity that seemed almost out of place in the gaudy excess of the casino. His suit was expensive, but understated, charcoal gray with a simple white shirt and burgundy tie. His face was thoughtful, troubled, the face of a man wrestling with questions that had no easy answers. He had been Julius Caesar's friend once more than a friend, really. Caesar had mentored him, brought him into the business when others had wanted to keep him out, because his father had been an honest man, a judge who'd refused to be bought. But Brutus had proven himself capable, intelligent, ruthless when necessary, and Caesar had rewarded that loyalty with trust and responsibility. Now, watching Julius Caesar bask in the adulation of the crowd, Brutus felt something twist inside his chest. It wasn't quite betrayal, not yet, but it was the seed from which betrayal might grow. "Look at him," Cassius said quietly, leaning close so only Brutus could hear over the electronic symphony of the slot machines. "He's not even pretending anymore. This whole spectacle, it's not about opening a casino. It's about showing everyone that he owns this city, that he owns all of us." Brutus said nothing, his eyes following Julius as the man stopped to accept a toast from a Nevada state senator who'd flown in for the occasion. The champagne flowed, the glasses clinked, and somewhere a photographer captured the moment for tomorrow's newspapers. "You've been quiet lately," Cassius continued, his voice taking on a probing quality. "Ever since that meeting last week when Julius announced his expansion plans. You heard what I heard, right? He's not satisfied with Vegas and Atlantic City. He wants Chicago. He wants Miami. He wants every major gambling operation in the country under his control. And anyone who stands in his way." Cassius drew a finger across his throat in a gesture as old as violence itself. "I heard," Brutus said finally, his voice barely audible above the ambient noise. "I heard every word. Then you know we have a problem. We all have a problem. Because Julius Caesar isn't building a business empire anymore, Brutus. He's building a dictatorship, and dictators don't share power. They don't tolerate equals. They tolerate subjects or enemies, and nothing in between." Across the casino floor, Julius had reached the high-stakes poker room, a separate chamber enclosed in tinted glass where the real money changed hands. Inside, beneath softer lighting and away from the masses, the city's true power brokers waited crime family representatives from New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles, all here to pay their respects, or, more accurately, to acknowledge the new reality of who held the power. They sat around a table, covered in green felt, their faces hard and weathered, men who'd built their fortunes on violence and intimidation, but who now found themselves outmaneuvered by someone more ambitious and more ruthless than they'd ever imagined. Julius entered that room like Caesar entering the Senate, and every man stood not out of respect, but out of recognition that the alternative to standing was to be swept away. He moved to the head of the table, a position that had been left conspicuously empty, waiting for him. He didn't sit immediately. Instead, he placed both hands flat on the table's surface and leaned forward, his eyes moving from face to face, holding each gaze just long enough to make his point. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying that peculiar mixture of warmth and threat that had become his trademark, "welcome to the future." Outside the poker room, Cassius watched through the tinted glass, his jaw tight. "You see that? You see how they bow and scrape? These are men who've killed for less than a dirty look, and they're treating him like he's untouchable, like he's immortal. No man is immortal, Brutus said quietly, and something in his tone made Cassius turn to look at him sharply. No, Cassius agreed, a slow smile spreading across his lean face. No man is, but some men forget that. They start to believe their own legend. They start to think the rules don't apply to them anymore. He paused, letting the implications hang in the air between them like cigarette smoke. And when that happens, when a man becomes more dangerous than useful, well, sometimes good people have to make hard choices. For the greater good. For survival. Brutus met his gaze, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. An understanding, a possibility, the first whisper of conspiracy in what would become a roar. We should talk, Cassius said. Soon. Somewhere private. You, me, and a few others who see what we see, who understand what's at stake. Before Brutus could respond, the doors to the poker room opened, and Julius Caesar emerged, his arm around the shoulder of a rival casino owner who'd resisted his expansion until tonight. Now the man was smiling, but it was the smile of someone who just signed away his future and was trying to convince himself he'd made a good deal. Julius's eyes found Brutus across the casino floor, and his face lit up with genuine warmth. He broke away from his entourage and strode over, his arms spreading wide. Brutus, my friend, where have you been hiding? This is your night, too, you know. None of this happens without your work, your dedication. He pulled Brutus into an embrace, clapping him on the back with the easy affection of a father or brother. Come, join me. There are people you need to meet, deals we need to discuss. The night is young, and tomorrow, the whole world changes. Brutus forced a smile, allowing himself to be led away, but not before he glanced back at Cassius. The lean man stood alone now, watching them go, his expression unreadable in the flashing lights of the casino floor. He lit another cigarette, the flame from his lighter briefly illuminating his face, and in that instant he looked like a man who'd already made his decision and was simply waiting for others to catch up. The celebration continued around them, the slot machines singing their siren song, the champagne flowing like water, and somewhere in the desert night outside, the future was already being written in blood and betrayal. The storm hit Las Vegas 3 nights after the grand opening, rolling in from the mountains with sheets of rain that turned the neon reflections on the strip into rivers of liquid color. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the desert in brief, violent flashes, and the tourists who'd come seeking sunshine and slot machine jackpots found themselves trapped indoors, their vacation plans washed away by nature's indifference to human desire. In a back booth at the Dunes Casino Coffee Shop, Neutral Territory, a property that Julius Caesar didn't yet control, Cassius sat nursing his 3rd cup of black coffee and his 2nd pack of Marlboros. The coffee shop was a relic from the 60s, all red vinyl booths and chrome fixtures, populated at this late hour by insomniacs, graveyard shift workers, and those who had nowhere else to go. A jukebox in the corner played Springsteen's Born in the USA, the volume low enough to provide cover for conversations that needed to stay private. Cassius checked his watch, a knockoff, Rolex that he wore specifically because the real thing would have drawn attention, and scanned the entrance. The rain had driven everyone inside, creating a constant flow of dripping humanity through the glass doors, shaking off water and complaining about the weather. He was waiting for someone, and his patience was wearing as thin as the coffee in his cup. And then he saw him. Casca pushed through the entrance, his leather jacket soaked through, his hair plastered to his skull. He looked around nervously before spotting Cassius and making his way to the booth. He slid in across from Cassius without a word, water pooling beneath him on the vinyl seat. "You're late," Cassius said, not looking up from his coffee. "Yeah, well, I had to make sure I wasn't followed," Casca shot back, his voice edgy with paranoia that might not have been entirely unjustified. "You know Anthony's got people watching everyone close to Julius these days. Ever since that article came out in the Review Journal, questioning where all his money's really coming from, he's been paranoid as hell. And when Julius gets paranoid, Anthony gets proactive, if you know what I mean." A waitress approached late 50s, platinum blonde hair teased high, her name tag reading Dolores, and set down a cup of coffee for Casca without being asked. She'd seen enough late-night meetings in her years to know when people wanted to be left alone. Casca wrapped his hands around the cup, grateful for the warmth. "So what's this about?" Casca asked once Dolores had retreated behind the counter. "Your message said it was urgent. Said it was about the future of the organization." Cassius leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "The future of the organization is exactly what this is about. Because if we don't act soon, there won't be an organization. There'll just be Julius Caesar and everyone else working for him or dead." "Jesus, Cassius, keep your voice down," Casca hissed, glancing around as if Anthony's men might materialize from the shadows. "You can't just say things like that. Not about Julius." "Why not?" "Because he's got everyone so terrified they can't even speak the truth anymore." "That's exactly my point." Cassius pulled out another cigarette, offered one to Casca, who took it with trembling fingers. "Let me ask you something. You were there at the poker room meeting last week, right? When Julius laid out his expansion plans?" "Yeah, I was there. So what?" "So what did you think?" "Really think, not what you told everyone else you thought." Casca took a long drag, the tip of his cigarette glowing orange in the dim light of the booth. Outside, lightning flashed again, followed by the distant rumble of thunder. I thought he's lost his mind. Chicago, Miami, Atlantic City's competitors, he wants it all. But it's not just about wanting it. It's about how he plans to get it. You heard him. Anyone who doesn't want a partner becomes a target. He didn't say business rival. He said target. Those were his exact words. And the families? What did you think when he told the representatives from New York and Chicago that they either work under his umbrella or they find themselves out in the cold? When he essentially told them he was taking over? Casca's hand shook slightly as he brought the cigarette back to his lips. I thought we were all going to die right there in that room. I thought those old school guys were going to pull out their pieces and turn the poker room into a shooting gallery. But you know what happened instead? Nothing. They sat there and took it. They nodded and smiled and shook his hand like he'd just offered them a promotion instead of a demotion to soldier status. You know why they took it? Cassius leaned even closer, his eyes intense. Because Julius has been smart. He's been patient. He didn't just build a casino empire. He built a network. He's got FBI agents on his payroll. He's got judges, senators, police captains. He's got evidence locked away in safe deposit boxes that could destroy any man in this city who's ever bent a rule or broken a law, which is everyone. He's built himself a fortress of leverage and blackmail, and now he's untouchable. Now he can do whatever he wants, take whatever he wants, and nobody can stop him. The jukebox switched songs, and now Tina Turner's voice filled the coffee shop, singing about private dancers and money. The irony wasn't lost on either man. "So what are you saying?" Casca asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "What exactly are you proposing here?" "I'm saying that sometimes for the greater good, good men have to do hard things. I'm saying that Julius Caesar used to be one of us, ambitious, sure, but reasonable. A team player. Now he's something else, something dangerous. A tyrant in the making. And tyrants don't stop until they're stopped." Casca stubbed out his cigarette in the glass ashtray between them, immediately lighting another. His hands were steadier now, but his eyes darted constantly to the door, to the windows streaked with rain, to the other patrons scattered throughout the coffee shop. "You're talking about killing Julius Caesar. You do realize that, right? You're not dancing around it or speaking in code. You're talking about murder." "I'm talking about survival," Cassius corrected. "I'm talking about preventing one man from destroying everything that dozens of men built over decades. I'm talking about restoring balance before it's too late." He paused, studying Casca's face. "And I'm talking about it with you because you're smart enough to see what's coming and brave enough to do something about it. Or am I wrong? Should I be having this conversation with someone else?" The challenge hung in the air between them. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the windows with increased urgency. Casca stared down at his coffee, watching the steam rise and dissipate. And for a long moment, Cassius thought he'd miscalculated, that Casca would bolt from the booth and run straight to Anthony, trading Cassius's life for favor with Julius. But then Casca looked up, and his eyes had changed. The fear was still there, but now it was accompanied by something else, determination, or maybe just exhaustion with being afraid. "Okay," Casca said quietly. "Okay, let's say I'm listening. Let's say I agree that Julius has become a problem. You can't just walk up to him and put a bullet in his head. He's surrounded 24/7 by Anthony and his crew. He's got bodyguards, security systems, the whole 9 yards. And even if you somehow got to him, you'd have to deal with Anthony immediately after. That psychopath would burn this city to the ground looking for whoever did it, which is exactly why this needs to be done right," Cassius said, a thin smile crossing his face. "It can't be one man acting alone. It has to be a group people Julius trusts, people inside his inner circle. It has to look like a consensus decision, not an assassination. It has to send a message that this wasn't personal vendetta, but necessary correction. And it has to happen somewhere he feels safe, where his guard is down. You've been thinking about this for a while, haven't you?" Casca said, something like awe creeping into his voice. "Since the night of the grand opening. Since I watched him walk into that poker room and demand submission from men who used to be his equals. Since I realized that nobody was going to stand up to him unless someone made the first move." Cassius pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket and slid it across the table. "These are names. People I've already talked to. People who see what we see. People who are ready to act when the time comes." Casca unfolded the paper, his eyes scanning the list. His eyebrows rose. "Decius, Senna, Trebonius. These are all Julius's senior people. These are guys who've made millions working for him, which is exactly why they understand what's at stake. They've seen how he operates up close. They know that today's trusted lieutenant is tomorrow's liability. They know that Julius doesn't share power, he loans it, and he can call in that loan any time he wants. They've all been smart enough to build their own operations on the side, their own safety nets, because they know that loyalty to Julius is a one-way street. The coffee shop door opened again, and both men tensed instinctively. But it was just an elderly couple seeking refuge from the storm, shaking off umbrellas and searching for an empty booth. Dolores moved to seat them, her practiced smile never faltering despite the late hour. "There's one name missing from this list," Casca said, tapping the paper with his finger. "The one name that matters more than all the others combined." "Brutus," Cassius said, and the name carried weight in his mouth. "I know. I'm working on him." "Working on him? Julius loves Brutus like a son. Maybe more than a son. And Brutus, everyone knows, Brutus is the most honorable guy in this whole dirty business. If you're trying to recruit him for something like this, you're wasting your time. He'd never betray Julius. He wouldn't betray Julius for personal gain, no, but for principle, for what's right. If Brutus can be made to see that Julius has become a threat not just to us, but to everything we've built, to the entire structure of how things work, if he can be convinced that saving the organization means stopping Julius, then yes, he'll act. And when he does, everyone else will follow. Because if Marcus Brutus, the one man in Vegas who still has a reputation for integrity, says that Julius Caesar must be stopped, then even Julius's most loyal followers will have to pause and reconsider. Casca folded the paper and tucked it into his own jacket, a gesture that felt like commitment. When? Soon. Julius is planning a private meeting next week at his compound outside the city. He's calling together his top people once to discuss the Chicago expansion in detail, assign territories, make it official. It'll be just us, no civilians, no press. Security will be tight, but we'll all be armed. We'll all have access. Cassius's voice dropped even lower. And we'll all have opportunity. Christ, Casca breathed. You're really going to do this? We're really going to do this, Cassius corrected. All of us together. Are you in or out, Casca? Because once you walk out of this coffee shop, there's no middle ground. You're either with us or you're a potential problem. The threat was implicit, but clear. Casca met Cassius's eyes and saw no mercy there, no room for hesitation. The storm raged outside, lightning illuminating the strip in stark flashes of white light, and somewhere in that moment between thunder and silence, Casca made his choice. "I'm in," he said. "God help us all, I'm in." Cassius's smile widened, and he raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. "To the future," he said, "and to men brave enough to shape it." They drank in silence, their pact sealed not with signatures or handshakes, but with shared understanding of the violence they were about to commit. Outside, the storm showed no signs of letting up, and in the neon-washed darkness of Las Vegas, the wheels of conspiracy began to turn with the inevitability of tragedy. The following evening, Marcus Brutus sat alone in his penthouse apartment overlooking the strip, a glass of scotch untouched on the table beside him. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view that real estate agents called priceless, the entire glittering expanse of Las Vegas, spread out below like a circuit board of lights and dreams. But tonight, Brutus saw none of it. His mind was elsewhere, replaying conversations, weighing loyalties, measuring the distance between what was and what might be. The knock at his door came at exactly 11 o'clock. Brutus knew who it would be before he opened it. Cassius stood in the hallway, his lean frame backlit by the corridor's recessed lighting, a bottle of expensive bourbon in one hand. "Figured you might need company," Cassius said, not waiting for an invitation before stepping inside. "And better booze than whatever you're drinking." Brutus closed the door and followed Cassius into the living room. The apartment was tastefully furnished leather furniture, abstract art on the walls, a sound system that probably cost more than most people's cars. But it felt empty somehow, like a showroom rather than a home. Cassius poured them both generous measures of bourbon and settled into the armchair across from where Brutus had been sitting. "You've been avoiding me," Cassius said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Ever since the grand opening. Every time I try to pull you aside for a conversation, you suddenly have somewhere else to be." "I've been busy," Brutus replied, but the excuse sounded weak even to his own ears. "Busy, right." Cassius took a sip, letting the silence stretch. "You know what I think? I think you already know what I want to talk about, and you're afraid to have the conversation. Because once it's spoken out loud, once it's real, you can't pretend you don't see what's happening anymore." Brutus picked up his glass, the scotch he'd poured an hour ago and never touched, and finally drank. The burn was welcome, a physical sensation to anchor him against the swirling thoughts in his head. "What is it you think I see, Cassius?" "You see the same thing I see. The same thing everyone sees but nobody wants to admit. Julius Caesar has changed. Or maybe he hasn't changed, maybe this is who he always was, and we were just too loyal or too stupid to notice. But now there's no denying it. He's not building an organization anymore. He's building a kingdom, and kings don't have partners or friends. They have subjects. He's ambitious," Brutus said carefully. "He always has been. That's not news. There's a difference between ambition and tyranny," Cassius shot back, leaning forward. "Between success and domination. Julius isn't satisfied with being the biggest player in Vegas. He wants to be the only player everywhere. And anyone who stands in his way, anyone who questions him, who hesitates, who shows even a hint of independence, becomes a target. You've seen it. Don't tell me you haven't." Brutus was quiet for a long moment, staring into his glass as if it might hold answers. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with something that might have been grief. "He mentored me, Cassius. When my father died and left me nothing but debts and a reputation for honesty, which in this business is the same as being cursed, Julius was the one who gave me a chance. He taught me the business. He trusted me when nobody else would. He's been more than a boss. He's been—" "A father figure?" Cassius interrupted. "I know, everyone knows. And that's exactly why this is so hard for you. But let me ask you something, Brutus. When you look at Julius now, do you see the man who mentored you? Or do you see someone who's become drunk on power? Someone who's forgotten that the organization is bigger than any one man?" Before Brutus could answer, the telephone rang a jarring electronic trill that shattered the intimacy of their conversation. Brutus picked up the cordless receiver, his face going through a series of expressions as he listened to whoever was on the other end. "When?" he asked. "Then? How many? And finally, I understand. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He hung up and stood, already moving toward his bedroom to change clothes. Cassius followed him to the doorway. "What happened?" "That was Anthony. There's been an incident at one of our warehouses out near Henderson. Fire, as somebody torched it, hit our inventory, our records, everything. Anthony says it looks professional, says it's a message." "A message from who?" Brutus pulled on a jacket, checked that his shoulder holster was secure. From Julius's competitors, I'd guess. From the people who don't want to fall in line with his expansion plans. Which proves your point, doesn't it? Julius pushes, people push back, and pretty soon this whole city is going to be a war zone, and all of us are going to be caught in the crossfire. He moved toward the door, but Cassius caught his arm. Brutus, listen to me. Julius is leading us all toward destruction. Not just him, all of us, everyone connected to him. You think when the FBI or the other families decide they've had enough, they're going to make distinctions between Julius and his associates? We're all going down with him unless someone has the courage to change course. Brutus pulled free, but gently. I have to go. We'll talk later. We're running out of time for later, Cassius called after him. The meeting at his compound is in 5 days. 5 days, Brutus. And after that, whatever happens next won't be up to us anymore. But Brutus was already gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click that sounded to Cassius's ears like a cell door locking. He stood alone in the penthouse, looking out at the city of lights, and wondered if he'd said enough, done enough, pushed hard enough, because everything depended on Brutus. Without him, the conspiracy was just a group of ambitious men looking out for themselves. With him, it became something more a righteous act, a necessary correction, maybe even justice. He poured himself another bourbon and raised the glass to his reflection in the window. To Brutus, he said quietly, may he find his conscience before it's too late for all of us. Outside, somewhere in the desert night, smoke rose from a burning warehouse, and the future drew closer with every passing hour. Dawn broke over Las Vegas with a kind of harsh, unforgiving light that exposed every crack in the pavement, every stain on the sidewalk, every broken promise the city had made to those who came seeking fortune and found only ruin. The warehouse fire had burned through the night, and now in the pale morning smoke still rose from the blackened skeleton of what had been a multi-million-dollar operation. Fire trucks lined the industrial road, their lights still spinning, though the flames had been extinguished hours ago. Firefighters moved through the wreckage, their faces smudged with soot, while police officers interviewed witnesses who claimed to have seen nothing, heard nothing, knew nothing, the 3 sacred vows of those who lived in the shadow of organized crime. Julius Caesar stood at the edge of the destruction, his black Mercedes sedan parked behind him, Mark Antony at his side. Julius wore a tracksuit Adidas, pristine white with black stripes and designer sunglasses that reflected the smoking ruins. His jaw was tight, his hands clenched at his sides, and those who knew him well recognized the signs of rage barely contained beneath a veneer of calm. $3 million in cash, Antony said, reading from a small notebook. Another $2 million in merchandise. Records going back 5 years, client lists, transaction details, shipment schedules. All gone. The safe survived, but everything else is ash. Who? Julius asked, the single word carrying more threat than most men could pack into an entire speech. We're still working on it. Could be the Chicago outfit. They've been making noise about your expansion plans. Could be Malone's crew from Atlantic City. Could be someone local who thinks they can take a shot at you and live to tell about it. Antony closed the notebook. Whoever it is, they're dead. I've got people asking questions. By tonight, we'll have names. By tomorrow morning, those names will be written on gravestones. Julius pulled off his sunglasses, revealing eyes that were red-rimmed from lack of sleep, but clear with purpose. I want everyone at the compound tomorrow night. Not next week tomorrow. Every senior member of the organization. I want them there, I want them armed, and I want them to understand that this attack wasn't just against me. It was against all of us, against everything we've built. You sure that's wise? Anthony asked carefully. Bringing everyone together in one place right after a hit like this? What if this was just the opening move? What if they're planning something bigger? Then let them try, Julius said, his voice cold as desert night. Let them come at us when we're all together, all ready, all armed and waiting. I'm done being cautious, Mark. I'm done trying to play nice with people who only understand force. From now on, we take what we want, and anyone who objects gets buried in the desert. Clear? Crystal, Anthony replied, though something in his expression suggested reservations he wasn't voicing. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the forensics team sift through debris, bagging evidence that would never make it to trial. Then Julius turned and walked back to his Mercedes, and Anthony followed, already pulling out his brick-sized cellular phone to start making calls. Across town, in a basement office beneath a pawn shop on East Fremont Street, Cassius gathered his conspirators. The room was cramped and windowless, lit by fluorescent tubes that flickered and hummed overhead. A card table in the center held an ashtray overflowing with cigarette butts, several empty beer bottles, and a hand-drawn map of Julius's compound. The men around the table represented the inner circle of Julius Caesar's organization, or at least the part of that circle that had decided survival meant betrayal. Casca was there, chain-smoking and nervous as always. Decius Brutus, no relation to Marcus, though he'd adopted the surname years ago as an homage to a man he respected, sat with his feet propped on an empty chair, his expression unreadable. Cinna, Trebonius, Metellus Cenber, and Caius Ligurus completed the circle, each man bringing his own reasons for being there, his own grievances against Julius, his own calculation that the risk of action outweighed the risk of inaction. Julius moved up the meeting. Cassius announced without preamble, "Tomorrow night instead of next week. Everyone's been called to the compound." He's paranoid after the warehouse fire, wants everyone together where he can see them. "Christ," Casca muttered. "Tomorrow, we're not ready." The plan was to have another week to prepare, to coordinate, to... "The plan changes," Cassius interrupted. "We adapt. Tomorrow night gives us everything we need, everyone in one place. Julius expecting an internal strategy session, security focused outward on potential external threats rather than inward on people he trusts. This is actually better than waiting. Better if Brutus is with us," Decius said quietly. "Without him, this whole thing falls apart. Julius loves Marcus Brutus. So does everyone else in the organization. If Brutus isn't part of this, we're just a bunch of ambitious thugs committing murder. With him, it becomes something more, something necessary." All eyes turned to Cassius, who allowed himself a small smile. "Brutus will be there. I'm meeting him tonight for dinner at the Golden Steer. One last conversation, one final push. And I promise you, by the time the stakes are finished, Marcus Brutus will be one of us." "You sound awfully confident," Trebonius observed, picking at the label on his beer bottle. "I am confident because I know Marcus Brutus. I know what drives him: honor, principle, the belief that one man should never have absolute power. He's been wrestling with his conscience for weeks now, and that warehouse fire, that's going to be the final straw. He's going to see it for what it is: evidence that Julius's ambition is destroying everything, bringing war to our doorstep. And when he sees that, when he truly accepts it, there's only one choice an honorable man can make. The Golden Steer was Old Vegas, a steakhouse that had survived the demolition and reinvention of the Strip by virtue of being authentic in a city built on illusion. The walls were dark wood paneling, the booths red leather worn smooth by decades of bodies, and the lighting was dim enough to make every conversation feel like a conspiracy. Frank Sinatra had eaten here. So had Sammy Davis Jr., Dean Martin, and every major mob figure who'd passed through Las Vegas in the last 40 years. The walls were covered with autographed photographs, celebrities and criminals often occupying the same frame, arms around each other's shoulders, all smiles for the camera. Cassius arrived first, taking a corner booth that offered a view of the entrance and no easy approach from behind. Old habits from a life lived on the edge of violence. He ordered a martini gin, very dry, 3 olives, and waited. The restaurant was moderately full despite the late hour. At the bar, a couple in their 60s nursed matching Manhattans, their wedding rings catching the light. At another booth, 3 men in expensive suits discussed a real estate deal in voices just loud enough to carry, but not loud enough to understand. The piano player in the corner worked through a medley of standards, his fingers dancing across the keys with the muscle memory of 10,000 performances. Brutus arrived 20 minutes late, looking like he'd aged a year in the past few days. His suit was rumpled, his tie loosened, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and troubled thoughts. He slid into the booth across from Cassius without greeting, immediately reaching for the scotch that had already been placed in front of his seat. Cassius knew his preferences. "You look like hell," Cassius observed. "I've been at the warehouse site all day. Investigators, insurance adjusters trying to piece together what happened. Anthony's on a rampage, threatening anyone and everyone. Julius is." He stopped, took a long drink. "Julius is talking about war, about making examples, about showing the entire city that nobody crosses him and lives. And how do you feel about that?" Brutus met his eyes. "You already know how I feel. Otherwise you wouldn't have called this meeting." A waiter appeared, older gentleman, white shirt and black vest, the uniform unchanged for decades, and took their orders. 2 porterhouse steaks, both medium rare, creamed spinach to share. Another round of drinks. The waiter departed with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd served murderers and movie stars with equal discretion. "Tomorrow night at the compound," Cassius said once they were alone again. "Julius has moved up the meeting. He wants everyone there, wants to project strength, unity. He's going to announce expanded operations, probably make examples of whoever he thinks might be disloyal. And after tomorrow night, Brutus, there won't be any going back. Whatever Julius becomes after this, we're all tied to him. His crimes become our crimes. His war becomes our war. Why are you telling me this?" Brutus asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Cassius leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I'm asking you to save us. All of us, the entire organization. Because if Julius continues on this path, we're all going to burn with him. The FBI is already building a case. You know that, right? I've got a source inside the federal building. They're waiting, watching, gathering evidence. They're going to bring down the biggest RIFO case in Nevada history, and when they do, everyone even remotely connected to Julius Caesar is going to prison for the rest of their lives. So what's your solution? Kill him? Murder the man who built all of this, who gave most of us everything we have. But there was no conviction in Brutus's words, only exhaustion. Is it murder to stop a tyrant? Is it murder to prevent a massacre? Because that's what's coming, Marcus. Why, you know it as well as I do. Julius has lost perspective. He thinks he's invincible. He's making moves that are going to bring the full weight of federal law enforcement down on all of us. And when that happens, your honor, your principles, your clean record, none of it will matter. You'll be just another mobster doing life in Leavenworth. The stakes arrived. Massive slabs of meat sizzling on oval plates, blood pooling at the edges. Neither man touched his food. The piano player had switched to something melancholy, and somewhere in the restaurant, a woman laughed a sound startlingly out of place in the weight of their conversation. There are others, Cassius continued. Good men, smart men. They're all ready to act, but they need someone they can believe in, someone who represents something more than self-interest. They need you, Marcus, because if Marcus Brutus says that Julius Caesar must be stopped, then it becomes a righteous act. It becomes necessity rather than ambition. Brutus finally picked up his knife and fork, cutting into the steak with surgical precision. He chewed slowly, mechanically, as if the act of eating was simply something to do, while his mind worked through impossible calculations. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. My father was an honest man in a dishonest business. He died broke and alone because he wouldn't compromise his principles. And I became everything he despised because I wanted to survive, to matter, to build something. Julius gave me that chance, and now you're asking me to repay that gift with betrayal. I'm asking you to repay it with courage, Cassius said. Your father died with his principles intact. Julius is dying too, Marcus, but he's dying of his own ambition, and he's trying to take all of us with him. You can either honor his memory by going down with the ship, or you can honor what he used to be by stopping what he's become. Brutus set down his utensils and looked at Cassius for a long moment. Outside, through the restaurant's small windows, the neon of the strip cast its eternal glow, and somewhere in that light and shadow, the future of Julius Caesar's empire hung in the balance. If I do this, Brutus said finally, each word seeming to cost him something precious, it's not for you. It's not for myself. It's for the principle that no man should have absolute power. That's the only reason I could live with. The only reason I could sleep at night afterward. Cassius reached across the table and gripped Brutus's hand. That's reason enough. For all of us. And in that moment, in a steakhouse older than most of the city around it, the conspiracy solidified from possibility into inevitability. The die was cast. Tomorrow night, at Julius Caesar's compound in the desert, blood would be spilled and empires would fall. The night before the meeting, Brutus sat alone in his penthouse, unable to sleep. The Scotch bottle sat within reach, but he'd stopped drinking an hour ago, realizing that what he needed wasn't numbness, but clarity. The television played CNN on mute, more coverage of the Berlin Wall coming down, the Cold War ending, the world changing in ways both profound and permanent. Brutus watched the images of Germans dancing on the rubble of division and wondered if tomorrow night would bring liberation, or simply a different kind of tyranny. His wife, Portia, found him there 3 a.m. She'd been staying at their Henderson house, giving him space during what she assumed was just another stressful business period. But something had drawn her back to night intuition, or perhaps just love's ability to sense when the beloved is in danger. "Marcus," she said softly, tying her silk robe around her waist. "What's wrong? And don't tell me it's just business. I've been married to you for 8 years. I know the difference between stress and whatever this is." Brutus looked at her, really looked at her, seeing the woman who'd married him despite knowing what world he inhabited, who'd stood by him through the violence and moral compromises that came with serving Julius Caesar. She deserved honesty, or at least as much honesty as he could give her without making her an accessory. "Tomorrow night," he said carefully, "things are going to change. I can't tell you how or why, but after tomorrow our lives will never be the same. And I need you to promise me that no matter what you hear, no matter what people say about me, you'll remember that I did what I thought was right. That I tried to serve something bigger than myself." Fear flickered across her face. "Marcus, you're scaring me. What are you planning? What's happening tomorrow night?" "I can't tell you. For your own protection, I can't tell you. But I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" She studied his face in the television's flickering light, and whatever she saw there must have convinced her not to push further. She crossed the room and took his hands in hers. "I trust you. I've always trusted you. Just promise me you'll come home. Whatever happens, promise me you'll survive it." It was a promise Brutus couldn't make, but he made it anyway, because sometimes love requires small mercies that taste like lies. Across town, in a warehouse that Julius didn't own and couldn't trace, Cassius conducted one final meeting with the conspirators. They sat on folding chairs in a circle, the space illuminated by work lights hanging from the ceiling. The concrete floor was cold, the air thick with cigarette smoke and tension. "Tomorrow we arrive separately," Cassius instructed, pointing to the compound map spread across an upturned crate. "Julius wants everyone there by 8. We come armed, he's expecting that, demanding it actually, so it won't raise suspicion. The meeting will be in his main conference room, here." He tapped the map. 15 of us total, including Julius and Anthony. Security will be outside, watching the perimeter, not inside watching us. "What about Anthony?" Casca asked, nervously cracking his knuckles. "The second Julius goes down, Anthony's going to go ballistic. He's a true believer. He'll kill every one of us if he gets the chance." "Which is why Anthony has to go down at the same time," Cassius said flatly. "No hesitation, no mercy. We all move together. We all commit together. And afterward we present a united front. This wasn't murder, it was necessary action to save the organization from Julius's reckless ambition." Decius cleared his throat. "I still think we should have a speech prepared. Something Brutus can say immediately after, while the blood's still fresh. Something that explains why this had to happen, that frames it properly." "Brutus will know what to say," Cassius assured them. "He's the most honorable man in this room. Hell, he might be the most honorable man in this whole business. When he speaks, people listen. When he says something was necessary, people believe him. And if we're wrong," Metellus asked quietly, "if people don't accept it, if the other families see this as weakness, as an opportunity to move against us, then we fight," Cassius said simply. "But we fight as free men, not as servants to a tyrant. We fight for ourselves, not for one man's unlimited ambition." The meeting broke up an hour later, each man departing separately, carrying with them the weight of what they'd agreed to do. As Casca left, he paused at the warehouse door and looked back at Cassius. "No turning back now," he said. "There was no turning back the moment Julius decided he was bigger than all of us," Cassius replied. "Tomorrow we just make that official." The day of the meeting dawned clear and cold, the desert winter asserting itself. Julius Caesar woke early in his compound, a sprawling estate 20 miles outside the city, surrounded by high walls and electronic surveillance. He did his morning workout, lifted weights in his private gym, and showered in a bathroom larger than most people's apartments. His reflection in the mirror showed a man at the height of his power, 52 years old, but looking 40, muscular and vital, his eyes sharp with intelligence and ambition. As he dressed a black suit, blood-red shirt, no tie, his assistant knocked timidly on the bedroom door. She was new, young, intimidated by proximity to power. She entered carrying a stack of faxes and messages. "Mr. Caesar, I'm sorry to disturb you, but these came overnight. They're all marked urgent." Julius took them, flipping through quickly. 3 separate warnings from different sources, all saying essentially the same thing. Postpone the meeting, don't gather everyone together. There are rumors of betrayal, whispers of conspiracy. Julius read them all and then methodically fed them into his paper shredder. "Sir," the assistant ventured. "Shouldn't you at least consider—" "Fear," Julius interrupted, "is what weak men feel when strong men act. I'm not afraid of rumors or whispers. Let them come, whoever they are. Let them try. They'll learn what happens to people who mistake my confidence for weakness." He dismissed her and finished dressing, and as the sun climbed higher over the Nevada desert, Julius Caesar prepared to meet his destiny with the absolute certainty of a man who'd never considered that empires can fall in a single night. The sun hung low on the horizon as the black sedans and luxury vehicles began arriving at Julius Caesar's compound, their headlights cutting through the desert dusk like searchlights seeking targets. The compound itself was a fortress disguised as a mansion, 10-foot walls, topped with cameras and motion sensors, a main gate flanked by guardhouses, and, beyond that, a sprawling hacienda-style structure with red tile roof and white stucco walls glowing orange in the fading light. Palm trees lined the circular driveway, imported at enormous expense, and kept alive through constant irrigation in this hostile desert environment. Everything about the place screamed power and permanence, a monument to one man's belief in his own invincibility. Security personnel moved through the grounds, men in dark suits with earpieces and barely concealed firearms, their eyes scanning every arrival, their radios crackling with coded communications. They checked identification, verified names against lists, and waved vehicles through with the mechanical efficiency of men who'd done this 100 times before. What they couldn't notice, was that tonight every arrival carried not just ambition but lethal intent. Brutus arrived at 7:45, driving his own car, a black Lincoln Continental with leather interior and a sound system that played only silence on the drive from the city. He'd dressed with particular care tonight, choosing a charcoal suit with a silver tie, as if the formality of his appearance could somehow dignify what he was about to do. At the gate, the security guard, a kid named Tommy, who couldn't have been more than 25, waved him through with a smile. "Evening, Mr. Brutus. Beautiful night, isn't it?" "Yes," Brutus replied, his voice sounding distant to his own ears. "Beautiful." He parked in the circular drive and sat for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, breathing deeply. Through the main entrance he could see other arrivals. Cassius had just entered, followed closely by Casca, both men moving with the false casualness of actors in a play they'd rehearsed but never performed. Through the main entrance he could see other arrivals. Cassius had just entered, followed closely by Casca, both men moving with the false casualness of actors in a play they'd rehearsed but never performed. Inside the compound, the main conference room occupied the entire west wing of the structure. It was designed to impress and intimidate in equal measure. A long mahogany table that could seat 20, surrounded by leather executive chairs, the walls decorated with framed newspaper headlines documenting Julius's rise to power. Caesar opens fifth casino. Gaming Commission approves Caesar expansion. Julius Caesar, the king of Las Vegas. A wet bar occupied one corner, already stocked with top-shelf liquor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the desert stretching toward distant mountains, though now in the gathering darkness they reflected back only the room itself and the men gathering within it. Julius stood at the head of the table, Mark Antony at his right hand, both men radiating confidence. Julius had poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon Pappy Van Winkle, 23 year, a bottle that cost more than most people made in a month. He raised the glass as each man entered, greeting them by name, clapping shoulders, making small talk about business and weather and sports. The Lakers were having a good season. The stock market had recovered from Black Monday. Life, Julius's demeanor suggested, was good and getting better. By 8:15, everyone had arrived. 15 men in total, arranged around the table in seats that seemed chosen by chance, but which had actually been carefully calculated by those planning murder. Brutus sat 3 seats from Julius, close enough to act, but not so close as to seem presumptuous. Cassius was directly across, his lean face composed, but his fingers drumming that constant rhythm against the table's edge. Casca, Decius, Trebonius, Cinna, Metellus, and Caius Ligurius were distributed strategically, each man knowing his role, each man acutely aware that in the next hour they would either change history or die trying. Antony stood behind Julius's chair, one hand resting casually on the back of it, the other near his shoulder holster. His eyes moved constantly, and for a moment they locked with Brutus's. Something passed between them, recognition, perhaps, or suspicion, or simply the acknowledgement of 2 predators in the same room. Then Antony looked away, and the moment passed. Julius called the meeting to order by the simple expedient of standing and raising his glass. The room fell silent immediately, all eyes turning to him. In the overhead lighting, his diamond rings caught and fractured the light into rainbow spectrums, and his face held the absolute certainty of a man who'd never lost, never failed, never doubted his own destiny. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying that peculiar mixture of warmth and steel that had built his empire, "we stand at a crossroads, not just for our organization, but for the entire gaming industry in this country. What we decide tonight, the moves we make in the coming weeks, will determine whether we become legends or footnotes, whether we're remembered as the men who seized the moment or the men who let it slip away." Julius paced as he spoke, his bourbon glass catching the light with each gesture. "Chicago is ready to fall. I've got 3 aldermen on payroll, 2 judges, and a police captain who understands the new reality. Miami is even easier. The Colombians want partners who can move money clean and fast. And we've got the infrastructure. Atlantic City's old guard is dying off, literally and figuratively. The future belongs to those bold enough to take it." He paused, looking around the table at faces he thought he knew, at men he believed were loyal. "Some of you have heard rumors, whispers that I'm moving too fast, grabbing too much, making us all targets. Let me address that directly. Yes, I'm aggressive. Yes, I'm ambitious. Because timid men don't build empires. Cautious men don't change the world. And make no mistake, we are changing the world. 20 years from now, when legitimate corporations run casinos in every state, when gambling is as American as baseball, people will look back and say it all started here. With us, with what we built. Because timid men don't build empires. Cautious men don't change the world. And make no mistake, we are changing the world. Around the table, some men nodded. Others remained still, their faces unreadable masks. Julius misread their silence as agreement, as respect, when in fact it was something else entirely, the stillness of men gathering courage for violence. So here's what happens next, Julius continued, setting down his glass and leaning forward, both hands flat on the mahogany table. I'm restructuring the organization. New territories, new responsibilities, new hierarchy. Some of you will see your roles expand. Others will find themselves reassigned to where I need you most. This isn't personal, it's strategic. It's about putting the right people in the right positions to maximize our growth. And what if someone disagrees with your restructuring? The question came from Metellus Kingbear, his voice carefully neutral. This isn't personal, it's strategic. It's about putting the right people in the right positions to maximize our growth. Julius's smile was all teeth and no warmth. Then they're welcome to leave the organization. After they've divested their interests, paid back what they owe, and signed the appropriate non-disclosure agreements. We're not a prison, Metellus. The door's always open. The implicit threat was clear. The door might be open, but beyond it lay the desert, and the desert was full of unmarked graves. Cassius caught Brutus's eye across the table and gave the smallest of nods. It was time. They'd planned this moment down to the second, choreographed it like a dance, and now the music was reaching its crescendo. Cassius stood slowly, reaching into his jacket as if retrieving papers. Julius, before we discuss restructuring, there's something we need to address. A matter of principle that concerns all of us. Julius turned, eyebrows raised in question. Principle? What principle is that, Cassius? The principle that no man should have absolute power. That an organization works best when power is shared, distributed, checked, and balanced. Cassius's hand emerged from his jacket holding not papers, but a nickel-plated .38 revolver. The principle that tyrants, no matter how successful, must eventually be stopped. The moment hung suspended in time, Julius's face shifting from confusion to comprehension to fury. Anthony reaching for his own weapon, the other conspirators rising from their chairs with guns drawn. The conference room transformed in an instant from boardroom to battlefield. Anthony's gun cleared his holster first, but Decius was faster. 2 shots, thunderously loud in the enclosed space, caught Anthony in the chest, spinning him backward. He crashed against the wet bar, bottles shattering, bourbon and blood mingling on the expensive carpet. He tried to raise his weapon, tried to protect Julius even as his life leaked away, but Trebonius fired twice more, and Anthony fell silent. Julius stood frozen, his hand instinctively moving toward his own waist, but he'd left his gun in his car, an oversight, a moment of misplaced confidence that would cost him everything. His eyes swept the room, taking in the circle of armed men, the guns all pointing at him, and finally settling on Brutus. "You?" Julius said, and the word carried more pain than any bullet could inflict. "Marcus, you're part of this?" Brutus stood slowly, his beretta steady in his hand, tears streaming down his face even as his aim never wavered. "I loved you like a father, Julius, But you've become something that no father should be. Something that has to end for all of us to survive. So this is how it happens, Julius said, his voice eerily calm. Betrayed by the men I trusted. Killed by the people I made rich. There's poetry in that, I suppose. Cassius stepped closer, his revolver aimed at Julius's chest. This isn't betrayal. This is correction. This is necessary. You've become too powerful, too reckless, too dangerous. And dangerous men don't get to walk away. Julius looked at each of them and turned Cassius, Casca, Decius, all the others, and saved Brutus for last. Then do it. But know that killing me doesn't kill what I built. It doesn't erase what I've created. My empire will outlive me. My name will outlive all of you. Maybe, Brutus said quietly, but at least we'll be free of your shadow. The gunfire came all at once, 7 men firing, the sound deafening, muzzle flashes lighting the room like lightning. Julius's body jerked with each impact, the force of the bullets driving him backward against the table. He slid down slowly, leaving a red smear on the mahogany, his expensive suit torn and bloodied, his diamond rings still catching the light even as the life left his eyes. The last thing Julius Caesar saw before darkness claimed him was Brutus's face, twisted with grief and conviction in equal measure, the smoke from his gun rising like incense at a funeral. The silence after the gunfire was absolute and terrible. 15 gunshots and an enclosed space left ears ringing, left the air thick with cordite smoke, left 7 men standing over 2 bodies and wondering if they'd just saved themselves or damned themselves beyond redemption. The smell of blood and gunpowder mixed with the spilled bourbon, creating a scent that would haunt nightmares for years to come. Brutus was the first to move. He knelt beside Julius's body, reached out with trembling fingers to close the dead man's eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered, though whether he was apologizing to Julius or to himself no one could say. "I'm sorry it came to this." "We don't have time for sentiment," Cassius said harshly, already moving toward the windows, checking the grounds beyond. Security heard those shots. "They'll be coming. We need to present a united front, need to control the narrative before someone else writes it for us." As if summoned by his words, pounding came at the conference room door, fists against wood, voices shouting questions. The door was locked from the inside, one of many small details the conspirators had arranged, but it wouldn't hold forever. "Let me handle this," Brutus said, standing and holstering his weapon. He moved to the door, composed himself, and opened it. 3 security guards stood in the hallway, hands on their weapons but not yet drawn, their faces a mixture of confusion and alarm. "Mr. Brutus, we heard shots. Is everything?" The lead guard's words died as he saw past Brutus into the room, saw the bodies, the blood, the standing conspirators. His hand moved toward his gun, but Brutus caught his wrist. "Don't, please, it's over. Julius Caesar and Mark Antony are dead, but this wasn't a hostile takeover. This was an internal matter, a necessary action to save the organization from destruction." Brutus's voice carried absolute authority, the voice of a man who'd crossed a line and found unexpected strength on the other side. "You can either be part of the solution going forward, or you can join them on the floor. Your choice." The guards looked at each other, looked at the scene beyond, made rapid calculations about loyalty and survival and paychecks. The lead guard slowly removed his hand from his weapon. "What do you need us to do?" "Secure the compound. No one leaves, no one enters." We'll need the cleaners here within the hour. You know who to call. And get everyone else on staff into the main room. They need to hear what happened from us, not from rumors or police scanners. Within 30 minutes, the compound's entire staff security, housekeepers, drivers, assistants, had been assembled in the main living room. They stood in nervous clusters, whispering to each other, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. The conspirators entered together, a united front, with Brutus at the center. Someone had wiped the blood from his hands, but there were still flecks of it on his shirt cuff, dark against the white fabric. Brutus stood before them and spoke with the quiet conviction of a man who'd wrestled with conscience and emerged with clarity. Tonight, Julius Caesar was killed. So was Mark Antony. This wasn't done lightly, and it wasn't done for personal gain. It was done because Julius had become a threat to this organization, to all of us who depend on it, to the very structure that keeps us all safe and prosperous. He paused, letting his words sink in, watching faces in the crowd shift from shock to calculation. Julius Caesar was a great man once. He built something extraordinary, but greatness unchecked becomes tyranny, and tyranny destroys everything it touches. He was planning operations that would have brought federal refill charges down on all of us. He was starting wars with other families that we couldn't win. He'd stopped listening to advice, stopped accepting counsel, stopped believing that any force in the world could touch him. And men who believe their gods inevitably discover they're just men, usually, when it's too late for everyone around them. Cassius stepped forward, his lean face hard. This organization will continue. Your jobs are safe. Your futures are secure. But from now on, we operate differently. No more one-man rule. No more absolute power. We share responsibility, distribute authority, make decisions collectively. That's how we survive. That's how we prosper. A voice from the back one of the younger security guards called out, "What about the other families? What about the other families? They're going to want blood for this. Let them try," Decius said coldly. "We're prepared for whatever comes, and anyone who wants to avenge Julius is welcome to step up. They'll end up the same place he did." The meeting dispersed slowly, staff members filtering back to their duties, some convinced, others simply too afraid to object. The cleaners arrived, professionals who asked no questions and left no evidence. Men whose services were unfortunately necessary in this business. By midnight, the conference room looked as if nothing had happened there except a routine business meeting. The bodies were gone, the blood cleaned, even the bullet holes in the walls patched and painted over with remarkable efficiency. The conspirators gathered one final time in Julius's personal office, surrounded by the trappings of his success awards, photographs, memorabilia from 4 decades in the gaming business. They poured drinks from his private stock and toasted their survival. "To freedom," Cassius said, raising his glass. "To necessity," Brutus added quietly. They drank and tried not to think about how the expensive scotch tasted like ashes in their mouths. Outside, Las Vegas glittered in the desert darkness, indifferent to the blood spilled in its name, already moving on to the next deal, the next scheme, the next empire, waiting to rise or fall. But in the city itself, in the casinos and backrooms and shadowy corners, where power actually lived, word was already spreading. Julius Caesar was dead. The king had fallen, and in the vacuum left by his absence, forces were already stirring, allies who would demand vengeance, enemies who would sense opportunity, and one man in particular who would prove that sometimes the dead have longer reaches than the living ever imagined. 3 weeks after Julius Caesar's death, the cracks in the conspiracy began to show. What had seemed like decisive action in the heat of the moment now looked, in the cold light of aftermath, like murder without mandate. The organization hadn't rallied behind the conspirators as Cassius had predicted. Instead, it had fractured into factions, some loyal to the new collective leadership, others quietly resentful, waiting for an opportunity to express their displeasure in the only language Vegas truly understood: violence. The funeral had been small, private, held at a cemetery chapel west of the city, with only immediate associates in attendance. No press, no public spectacle, nothing that might draw attention from law enforcement already circling like vultures. Julius was laid to rest in a marble mausoleum that cost $250,000, his name carved in letters a foot high, and for 3 days afterward, people left flowers and notes at the gates. Not staff or employees, but civilians dealers he'd tipped generously, cocktail waitresses whose college tuition he'd paid, families who'd received anonymous help during hard times. Julius Caesar, for all his ambition and ruthlessness, had understood that power required both fear and love, and he'd cultivated both with equal skill. Brutus stood at his penthouse window, watching the sun set over the strip, and wondered if they'd made a terrible mistake. The organization was rudderless now, decisions made by committee when they'd once been made by decree. Money was still flowing, operations still running, but there was uncertainty in every transaction, hesitation where there'd once been confidence. And in a business built on image and intimidation, uncertainty was blood in the water. His telephone rang. Cassius's voice came through tense and urgent. "Turn on channel 3. Right now." Brutus grabbed the remote and switched on the television. The local evening news was broadcasting live from outside the federal building downtown. FBI agents and windbreakers were leading 3 men in handcuffs toward waiting vehicles, and the reporter's breathless narration explained what Brutus's sinking stomach already knew, and what sources are calling the largest organized crime bust in Nevada history. The arrests include casino executives, local officials, and alleged members of what the FBI describes as the Caesar crime family. Special Agent Richard Octavius, who led the investigation, says this is just the beginning. The camera cut to a press conference. A man in his early 40s stood at a podium, his dark suit impeccable, his face carrying the righteous conviction of someone who believed absolutely in his own mission. Special Agent Richard Octavius looked like Central Casting's version of an FBI agent square-jawed, clear-eyed, radiating competence and determination. But those who knew his history understood he was something more dangerous than a zealous lawman. He was a true believer with a personal stake. For years, Julius Caesar operated with impunity in this city, Octavius said, his voice carrying across the press room. He corrupted officials, intimidated witnesses, and built an empire on violence and intimidation. His recent death doesn't end our investigation. It accelerates it, because power doesn't die with one man. It transfers, it adapts, it continues. And everyone who profited from Julius Caesar's criminal enterprise, everyone who enabled his operations, everyone who thought they could hide behind his shadow, you're all on notice. Justice is coming. The camera flashed to mugshots of the arrested men. 2 were low-level operators, easily replaced. But the third was Nicholas Barone, one of Julius's longest-serving lieutenants. a man who handled sensitive financial transactions and knew where bodies were buried, literally and figuratively. If Barone talked, if he made a deal, the entire organization would collapse. Brutus's phone rang again. This time it was Casca, his voice trembling. Did you see the news? That FBI agent, he's not going to stop. Julius kept him at bay, had enough leverage to keep the feds in check. But now? Now there's nothing stopping him. We're all going to prison, Brutus. We killed Julius and opened the door for this. Stay calm, Brutus said, though he felt anything but calm himself. We'll figure this out. Meet at the usual place in an hour. Get everyone together. But even as he said it, Brutus knew that calm was a luxury they could no longer afford. The world was closing in, and the safe refuge they'd imagined after Julius's death was revealed as illusion. They'd killed the king, but inherited the kingdom's problems, magnified by their own lack of his particular genius for manipulation and control. Across town, in a motel room that cost $39 a night, a man sat watching the same newscast with very different emotions. His name was Octavio Marin, though most people knew him simply as young Oct, Julius Caesar's nephew, the son of his only sister, a kid who'd grown up worshiping his uncle and learning the business from the ground up. He was 26 years old, handsome in a dangerous way, with his uncle's charisma and his own particular brand of ambition. He'd been in Los Angeles when Julius was killed, meeting with West Coast connections, and he'd returned to find his world destroyed and his uncle's murderers running free. He'd spent 3 weeks planning, preparing, building alliances with those still loyal to Julius's memory. And now, watching the FBI close in on the conspirators, he saw his opportunity. Let them squirm, let them feel the walls closing in. And then, when they were most vulnerable, most desperate, he would strike. Not for justice, young October didn't believe in justice, but for vengeance, for legacy, and for the chance to build his own empire on the ruins of what his uncle had created and the conspirators had destroyed. He picked up the phone and dialed the number he'd memorized. When the voice answered, he spoke 4 words. It's time to move. The meeting took place not in one of their usual locations, but in a construction site on the edge of town, a half-finished shopping center that had run out of funding, its concrete skeleton exposed to the desert wind. The conspirators arrived separately, parking blocks away and approaching on foot, their paranoia justified by the FBI arrests and the sense that everything they'd built was crumbling beneath their feet. Brutus arrived last, finding the others huddled in what would have been a retail space, illuminated only by flashlights they'd brought. Their faces looked haggard in the harsh beam of light, shadows carving deep lines of stress and fear. "Barone's talking," Cassius said without preamble. "I've got a source inside the federal building. He's making a deal full immunity in exchange for testimony. He's giving them everything. Bank accounts, shell corporations, payoff schedules, evidence Julius kept locked away. Everything. Then we're finished," Casca said, his voice breaking. "We're all going to die in prison. This was supposed to make things better. We were supposed to be free. We are free," Cassius shot back. "Free of Julius's insanity, free of his reckless expansion, free of following one man into disaster. Yes, the FBI is a problem, but it's a problem we can manage. We liquidate what we can, move money offshore, prepare exit strategies if necessary. We knew this business came with risks. Risks, yes. Certainty of federal prosecution? That's different. Decius lit a cigarette, his hands shaking. "Maybe we should approach Octavius, make our own deal. Give him what he wants in exchange for immunity." "And what exactly do we give him?" Brutus asked quietly. "Julius is already dead. Anthony is dead. We can't deliver them to justice because we killed them. We are the criminals he's looking for." The truth of it hung in the cold air. They'd murdered their way out of one problem and straight into another, and now there was no clear path forward, no simple solution, no Julius Caesar to make the hard decisions and bear the consequences. "There's something else," Trebonius said, stepping forward from the shadows. "Word on the street is that young OCT is back in town. Julius's nephew. He's been meeting with the old guard, with people who were loyal to Julius. He's building something." "Building what?" Cassius demanded. "He's a kid. He's got no organization, no structure, no. He's got fury," Trebonius interrupted. "And he's got his uncle's name. That's worth more than you think. People loved Julius, or at least they respected him. Young October is positioning himself as the rightful heir, and he's making it known that he holds us responsible for his uncle's death. He's not going to the FBI or the police. He's going to come at us directly." Brutus felt the weight of it settling on his shoulders, not just fear, but a terrible understanding that the violence they'd initiated hadn't ended anything. It had simply shifted the battlefield, multiplied the enemies, guaranteed that more blood would follow. "Then we need to move first," Cassius said, his voice taking on the hard edge of a man cornered. "Find young October before he finds us. Make him understand that revenge is a luxury he can't afford." "You mean kill him too?" Brutus asked, unable to keep the disgust from his voice. "Is that the solution now? Just keep killing until there's nobody left to oppose us? If that's what it takes to survive, then yes." Cassius's composure cracked, revealing the desperation beneath. "We crossed the Rubicon when we killed Julius Marcus. There's no going back. There's no undoing what we did. We can only move forward, and moving forward means eliminating threats before they eliminate us." "This isn't what I agreed to," Brutus said. "I agreed to stop a tyrant, not to become one. You think you get to have clean hands in this business? You think there's a version of this story where we're the heroes?" Cassius laughed bitterly. "We're murderers, Brutus. All of us. The only question now is whether we're going to be successful murderers or dead ones." Before Brutus could respond, the sound of approaching vehicles cut through the night, multiple engines moving fast. Everyone tensed, hands moving toward weapons, flashlights switching off. Through the empty window frames, headlights appeared. At least 6 vehicles forming a semicircle around the construction site. "FBI?" Casca whispered, but even as he said it, they all knew that wasn't right. The FBI would have come with sirens, with loudspeakers, with proper procedure. This was something else. The vehicles disgorged armed men, not in FBI windbreakers, but in street clothes, carrying an arsenal that included shotguns, assault rifles, and handguns. And leading them, walking with the confident swagger of someone who knew he held all the cards, was Octavio Marin, young Oct, Julius Caesar's nephew, and apparently his avenger. He stopped at the edge of the construction site, close enough to be heard, but far enough to stay clear of any desperate gunfire. His voice carried across the space, young but hard, carrying an echo of his uncle's charisma, twisted into something darker. "Gentlemen," he called out, "I believe we have some unfinished business to discuss. About family, about loyalty. about what happens to men who murder kings and think they can walk away unpunished. The conspirators looked at each other in the darkness, trapped between federal indictment and street vengeance, and realized that the price of their betrayal was still being calculated, and the bill was coming due in blood. Brutus stepped forward from the shadows of the construction site, his hands visible and empty, though his holstered beretta pressed against his ribs like an accusation. Octavio, this doesn't have to end in more bloodshed. Your Uncle Julius was a great man, but he'd become dangerous. To himself, to all of us. What we did for the survival of the organization. Young Ox's laugh was harsh and without humor. The survival of the organization? Is that what you tell yourself when you close your eyes at night, Brutus? That you murdered the man who made you, who trusted you like a son for some higher purpose? He took a step closer, and his men moved with him. A choreographed threat. My uncle built this city's underground with his bare hands. He gave all of you everything you have, and you repaid him with bullets and betrayal. Your uncle was planning operations that would have destroyed us all. Cassius called out, his voice defiant despite their tactical disadvantage. He was going to war with families we couldn't beat, drawing federal attention we couldn't survive. We saved the organization from his megalomania. Saved it? Young October gestured to the armed men surrounding them. Half the organization is ready to testify against you. The other half is standing with me, waiting for the order to put you all in the ground where you belong. You didn't save anything, Cassius. You destroyed it. And now I'm here to collect the debt. The standoff held for a moment 7 conspirators against 20 of young Ox's soldiers. Concrete and shadows and the weight of inevitability pressing down on them all. Then Casca, his nerves finally breaking completely, drew his weapon and fired. The shot went wild, sparking off metal rebar, but it shattered the fragile piece like a hammer through glass. Young Ox's men returned fire immediately, muzzle flashes lighting the construction site like a deadly light show. The conspirators scattered, diving for cover behind concrete pillars and construction equipment. Brutus rolled behind a stack of cinder blocks, his beretta in his hand now, returning fire more from instinct than strategy. The noise was overwhelming gunshots echoing off concrete. Men shouting, the tinkle of shell casings hitting the ground like deadly rain. Casca went down first, multiple rounds catching him as he tried to run for the exit. He sprawled across the unfinished floor, his blood pooling in the grooves meant for tile. Decius took a shotgun blast that threw him backward into a pile of drywall. Trebonius made it to the parking area but was cut down before he reached his vehicle. One by one, the conspirators fell, their grand designs ending in the mundane violence of a desert construction site. Cassius fought like a cornered wolf, his nickel-plated revolver barking as he moved from cover to cover. He took down 2 of young Ox's men before a burst of automatic fire found him, stitching across his chest and spinning him to the ground. He lay there, blood bubbling from his lips, his eyes finding Brutus across the chaos. Worth it, he gasped with his final breath. Had to try. Had to. Then he was gone, his lean face going slack, his constant nervous energy finally, permanently stilled. Brutus found himself alone, the last conspirator standing, surrounded by bodies of friends and enemies alike. His gun was empty, the slide locked back, useless. Young Ox's men closed in, their weapons trained on him, waiting for the order. Young October himself approached, stepping over Cassius's corpse without a glance. You were the one he loved most, young October said quietly, almost gently. He talked about you constantly. Marcus Brutus, the honorable one, the one who could be trusted. And you put the first bullet in him. How does that feel, knowing you betrayed the man who loved you like a son? Brutus met his eyes and found no mercy there, only the cold arithmetic of vengeance. It feels like the worst thing I've ever done, and if I had to do it again, knowing everything I know now, I'd still pull the trigger, because your uncle had become something that couldn't be allowed to continue. Not because I hated him, because I loved what he used to be and couldn't watch what he'd become. Poet and murderer, young October said. My uncle always said you had a conscience. I guess he was right. He raised his own weapon, a chrome .45 automatic that had belonged to Julius, taken from his personal effects. Any last words? Brutus thought of Portia, hoped she'd understand and knew she never could. Thought of Julius, wondered if somewhere beyond death there was judgment, and whether his actions would be weighed fairly or damned absolutely. Thought of the organization they'd all served and bled for, and realized with terrible clarity that it would survive them all, would continue grinding through lives and souls long after everyone here was forgotten. Caesar was ambitious, Brutus said finally, his voice steady. I killed him for that, and now I pay the price. That's how it works in this business. That's how it's always worked. Young Oct nodded slowly, something like respect flickering across his face. Then he pulled the trigger. Once, twice, 3 times. Brutus felt the impacts like hammer blows, felt his legs give out, felt the cold concrete against his cheek. The pain was distant, already fading, and as darkness closed in, his last thought was a question without answer. Had it been worth it? The construction site fell silent except for the wind and the distant sound of sirens finally approaching. Young October holstered his weapon and surveyed the carnage. 7 conspirators dead, 3 of his own men down, blood and shell casings littering the unfinished floor. It wasn't clean, wasn't neat, but it was done. Clean this up, he told his lieutenant. Make it look like a deal gone bad, rival crews, nothing that connects back to us. And spread the word Julius Caesar has been avenged. The organization is under new management. Anyone who wants to discuss the transition is welcome to reach out. Anyone who wants to object can join these guys in the desert. As his men went to work and the sirens grew closer, young Oct walked back to his vehicle, already planning his next moves. The FBI would still come, deals would still need to be made, territory would still need to be secured. But he'd avenged his uncle, claimed his inheritance in blood, and established himself as a force to be respected or feared. In the Las Vegas underworld of 1989, that was worth more than all the casinos on the Strip. The city's neon continued to burn against the desert night, indifferent to the violence done in its name, already forgetting the names of the dead and moving on to the next deal, the next dream, the next empire waiting to rise from blood and ambition. Julius Caesar was gone. The conspirators who killed him were gone, but the game continued, because the game always continued, and in Las Vegas, the house always won.